to a series of basics of interpretation of statutes. In this video, we'll talk about Mischief Rule of Interpretation, its relevant case laws, and advantages and disadvantages of the rule. Now, Mischief Rule comes into picture only when the literal rule fails. This rule was developed in England in a Hayden's case. That is why it is also known as Hayden's Rule of Interpretation. In this case, the judiciary has laid down 4 parameters for the application of this rule. The first one is what was the common law on that subject matter. Secondly, what was the defect or mischief in that common law for which a new law was enacted. Third is what remedies provided in the new law to remove that defect or mischief. Fourthly, what is the true reason for enacting that remedy. After finding 4 these parameters, the court should apply mischief rule in a manner which will advance the remedy and suppress the mischief or defect. Now let's understand this with an example. Now, there was a Street Offences Act which prohibits the prostitutes to call people who are walking on the street. Here, the prostitutes were calling the people not by standing on the street, they were calling people from the windows and doors of the bungalows which are on the street. Now, the question arises whether the act amounts to be committed on a street or not. Now, to understand it, the legislature found that there was no law under common law which prohibits such act. So, the defect was there was no law which prohibits the act of the prostitutes. And the remedy which was provided in the new law, that is the Street Offences Act, was to make that act punishable. Now, the reason behind providing that remedy is so that the people can walk freely, peacefully, and without any disturbance on the street. So, the court found these 4 parameters and then applied the Mischief Rule of Interpretation and held that because the true reason of the remedy is that the people can walk peacefully and without any disturbance on the street. Therefore, here the street does not mean merely standing on the streets. Rather, if any prostitute is calling the people from the doors and windows, even then it is a punishable act because it leads to disturbance for the people who are walking on the street. So, by applying this rule, the court held that the act of the prostitute is punishable under Street Offences Act. Another case is Parallel versus Mahadev. In this case, a flavored supari was in question because it was flavored with artificial flavors which was prohibited under the Food Adulteration Act. Now the question arises whether supari can be called a food or not. Now the court held that selling of adulterated food is made punishable under this act. The reason behind the remedy is so that the people do not consume adulterated food as it has ill effect on the health of the people. Keeping in view the intent of the remedy which is provided in the Food Adulteration Act, the court held that we cannot interpret the term food in a narrower sense and their flavored supari is considered as food and held that the act is punishable under Food Adulteration Act. Now, if we talk about the advantages of the Mischief Rule of Interpretation, then the first advantage is that it is flexible than the strict rule of interpretation. Secondly, it gives more importance to the legal intent than to the wording used in the law. Thirdly, it empowers the judiciary to interpret the provision in a manner which will suppress the defect and advance the remedy and remove the absurdity which arises out of literal rule of interpretation. Fourth is it makes the law dynamic because by using this rule, the judiciary can interpret the provision keeping in view the modern social and economic conditions which the legislature failed to imagine at the time of enactment. Now, if we talk about disadvantages, the first disadvantage is that it empowers the judiciary to lay down a law which was not enacted by the legislature. So, it leads to violation of the doctrine of separation of power. Second is because it gives power to the judiciary, so it also leads to subjectivities which can vary from judge to judge. Third, it leads to uncertainty and unpredictability because the law is interpreted by the judiciary when the case reaches to the court. Therefore, in such a manner, it is not possible for a layman to understand the law by merely reading it because the judiciary does not go by the word, rather they go by the intent of the legislature. So it makes the law unpredictable and uncertain. These are the disadvantages of a mischief rule of interpretation. I hope you like this video, and for more such videos, please like, share and subscribe.